And I thought long and hard as to whether or not it was the right fit for me. But I thought that I would come and see if I could contribute to the organisation. And to be fair, despite a lot of the very positive things that I think has come out of the Police Federation over many, many years, I saw an organisation that needed to change, that needed to become more responsive to its members. And primarily, my thoughts around this came on the back of the Windsor 1, Windsor 2 review into police pay and conditions. And I saw, certainly as a national rep and being involved in some of the debates and the conversations that took place around our ability to respond to the Tom Windsor reports, I saw an organisation that was trying very, very hard, but because of the way that it was structured, sometimes had difficulty in meeting the needs of the members and being able to respond as quickly as possible to what was a fast-moving, changing policing landscape. And that's what convinced me that the organisation needed to look at itself and needed to review how it was structured and how it represents members in order to be more effective. Interestingly, there were already conversations happening within the organisation about what the Federation needs to look like in the future. And those conversations continued and gathered a certain amount of momentum. And then I think it's fair to say that eventually, with other events, including the Andrew Mitchell affair, there was a real impetus within the organisation to take a long, hard look at ourselves and to see what we need to do to change it for the better. And certainly when I stood as vice chair, it was on the back of doing that. And indeed, since being elected chair, it's been my role really to be the figurehead of the organisation that is reforming and changing. And we've come quite a long way in the last 2 years. We're almost at the end of the reform and change process, but there is still plenty of work to do. So for me, I think we're moving in the right direction. I still think we've got quite a lot of work to do, but I think that certainly in terms of my role as the chairman and being responsible, if you like, for the reputation of the organisation and the relationships between the organisation and important stakeholders, then I think we've come quite a long way. It wasn't that long ago that the Police Federation didn't really have a relationship with government or with MPs at all, and yet I think a lot of that has changed. That's not to say that we agree with everything that the MPs and the politicians say to us, and so we need to make sure that we can evidence our arguments, that we can represent the views of our members in an authoritative and evidenced way in order to win the arguments in terms of better pay and conditions for police officers, better conditions for the police service and a more efficient organisation. So that's my sort of opening gambit. I've probably gone 2 minutes too long, but I know that before we get into answering your questions, Andy is going to speak for a few minutes around his role as General Secretary. So over to you, Andy.
Thank you. I'm not going to, so I'll make up the time for you, as I say not too much, but like Steve, I came into the national organisation about 3 years ago. I'm a Metropolitan Police Sergeant, and I've been the National General Secretary at the same time as Steve has been Chair. I think both of us came in with a clear agenda to deliver the changes which the organisation had agreed, and that's been a big part of the last 2 years for me working at it. I think my day job, which is what I get most out of, is dealing with the pay and conditions side of the business, negotiating with government, places like the College of Policing, the Chief Counsel. It is a challenge, as Steve said, and a lot of the time we're not at the same place as a lot of other groups of people who have views about how the police service should be reformed. But I think it is important that we do say, on behalf of the Federated ranks, what our view is. And like I said, this week's actually really important for that, because the pay review body hopefully will, the submission will be announced this week. I have to talk about that, and the whole other stuff about the things which I do on a day-to-day basis. But it's been an interesting 2 years. And like Steve says, I think we are, with things like the reform programme, we're starting to get there now, starting to deliver what we need to really create a great organisation for the future. So I'm going to shut up now and I'll let the questions come in if there are any. It's the hashtag ParkSeek. When will the separate rank boards be scrapped as per the Normanton review? Shall I start off on that one? The rank boards will go in regulation terms when the regulations are enacted by Parliament. We're in a consultation with the Home Office at the moment around what those new regulations look like, but the deliverer will be the new structure, which will not have rank boards within them. For example, a lot of boards around the country have already taken steps to start to operate in a new way, and here at Leatherhead, all the boards have started the process of winding down what was the old rank separate committees. So the enactment in regs will be the official stage, but we're also making good progress on for them to be wound down. But of course, the most important thing is we need to keep the business going at the same time. So all the work that people do around things like processing claims, looking at members' requests, they still need to be captured. So we still have to do that piece of work in the meantime.
So we're open now to your questions. I'm sure that I would agree with everything that Andy just said, except that I can't actually hear it.
Just say yes then.
Yeah, I'm guessing that that you said basically it was a work in progress, but we're moving as quickly as we can to get to the structures that has been detailed in the Normanton report, and people who are interested in terms of the way that our structures are currently configured, then I would certainly suggest that if you haven't, have a read of the Normanton report and have a read around some of the background around why the structures of the organisation is changing. It really goes back to what I was saying in my introduction. So just going back to ParkSeek, can't Leatherhead follow the lead of other regions and work as one in anticipation of the inevitable regs change? It's a really good question, and it's something that at the start of the reform programme, we had quite a lot of debate around. One of the issues that we had to deal with is that the way that we are constituted and the way that we are governed by an Act of Parliament and police regulations is one of the things that gives us as police officers some protection. And of course, it's something that certainly local federation reps will constantly bang on about in terms of police regulations say this and police regulations say that. It's what gives us as individual officers working as police officers protection. And there was a lot of debate over, can we basically say we're going to change, and so let's just start doing those changes without having had the change in regulations. But there was a strong voice within the organisation that said you can't, on the one hand, use regulations as the standard and then decide to ignore them on the other hand. Having said all of that, in terms of the way that we have been working, the way that the three separate rank committees have come closer together, we're now in a position where, to all intents and purposes, we are doing exactly that. But police regulations still exist in the way that we are constituted. And so it is a bit of a balancing act. But in terms of the way the organisation has moved, we have moved nationally quite significantly. We're still not quite there yet, and there's still more work to do. Andy, did you want to add anything to that for ParkSeek?
No, I said it on the last time, but you've captured what I said. Thank you.
I think you said you've already said all of that, so apologies if I repeated it. Right. Cops against. Was a decision taken at the latest IMB to remove Article 6? Andy?
I think we're talking about Schedule 6 here, which is a process by which Federation representatives can be removed at the moment. It's what exists in regulations at the moment. And there was a agreement, not at the last IMB, but the one before it and at the council, to, when we change to the new structures, our Schedule 6 will be replaced with a governance process, which is basically a process by which Fed reps can be suspended or removed or have sanctions against them placed on them by people within the organisation who will uphold the governance procedure. Part of that will be my role, the General Secretary's role, but there will also be a panel, a governance panel, who will work with the National General Secretary to do that. So yes, in the new structure, Schedule 6 will not exist anymore, but we will still have elections. So every 3 years, the members will be able to decide on who they want as their rep. So that side of it remains.
Leicester Polfed, from our council, what feedback has been received following the Leicester Chiefs regarding pension forecasts and their obligation to our members? Well, interestingly, that part of what Leicester's talking about there has been covered in the most recent bulletin that's gone out to the whole membership, which went out at the weekend. But Andy, have you got some more detail you can add to that?
Our forces are under obligation, or the finance departments are, to produce forecasts for officers by September of this year, 17 months after the start of the new scheme. So that's their legal obligation. Some forces have actually done it already. Other forces are lagging behind, but by September they have to do that. At the Scheme Advisory Board, which I attend, which is the governance procedure for the for pensions, I've raised it before and I've kept raising it. There's a meeting this Friday. Well, we emphasise that again. And I think that forces now are aware of the fact that they have to comply and hopefully, which is what officers deserve to have, proper forecasting, and they will do that by September. If they don't, we'll hold them to account, and obviously that is a legal obligation for them to do that.
Parksy, I saw, excuse me, I'm just trying to plug in so I can actually hear what's being said from Andy. Here we go. Parksy, do you feel PFEW are now reluctant to be proactive, challenging the media and government after having fingers burnt with Plebgate? No, I don't. And certainly when we get the opportunity to push back at government, whether it be through the media or in other ways, then absolutely we do it. And certainly I will never be shy in using the media appropriately, and indeed challenging the media when they say things that are inaccurate or that are wrong. And indeed, I've had numerous letters to editors of papers published pointing out their inaccuracies. It is, of course, really difficult when the media says something that either we don't agree with or indeed is factually inaccurate, because once it's been published, it's been published. And so to a certain extent, you're fighting a losing battle because the story is already out there. And I think one of the strategies that we have around that is to have a robust but constructive relationship with all parts of the media, whether it be broadcast media, whether it be the journalists who work in that, whether it be the newspapers and the crime reporters, so that when they get a story and they want to publish something, they have the conversation with us first, so that they make it accurate in the first place. What I would say, and certainly something that has really struck me since certainly my role as vice chair and as chair, is the level of influence that the government sometimes can have over sections of the media is quite significant. But I certainly won't shy away from dealing with those issues in the media and indeed with government. And I think in terms of positioning ourselves as an organisation to be taken seriously, I think we've come a long way. You know, up until recently, there has been some negative stuff, again, in the press around the PFEW, most of which is inaccurate. But certainly before that, for a good 18 months, nearly 2 years, there was no negative stories about PFEW. But what there was PFEW giving a voice to the concerns of the members and being covered in a lot of media outlets. Certainly conference this year, which was in May, we probably had more coverage, national coverage, both on the television, in radio and the papers, than we've had for a long, long time. So I hope that answers your question, Parksy. And my screen's gone a little bit funny because I can't.
Can I just say, on the cops against the technical question, we're just looking to give you some instructions on that. So we'll work our way through that. And I'll do the next one, which is about cops against have asked, can you foresee a time when your legal position will change regarding the legal challenge to the police pension scheme? I've had chats with the Pension Challenge Group, and I was speaking to some new reps today about that. And I think I've always said, and I've said it to the challenge group as well, is that we will review the situation as it goes along. And of course, we look at the legal actions and we look at what's happening. Of course, I'm not saying that our position is this and that is it and we'll never ever change it. We need to keep everything under review and see what's happening. I would say around that, and as I said to the new representatives who started their training course today at Leatherhead, one of the issues we have around this, which I realise we haven't possibly communicated in the best way, is around the challenges based around looking at the transitional protections and using that as a vehicle to challenge the scheme. And of course, for the Federation, transitional protections, not just in pension matters, are a good thing. Changes to paying conditions all tend to have transitional arrangements built into them so that you don't get cliff edge changes to paying conditions. And the Federation, whereas we might not be able to say that we can stop every change that comes in around policing, we have an influence on that, and part of that is to try and maximise the protections around transitional protections. So if someone's going to say, well, we're going to pay officers a different way, it doesn't come in tomorrow, it comes over a period of time to lessen the impact. And that's one of the things we have, which I don't think will change, but we will keep the legal position under review. Steve, did you want the next one, the Lee Hun, or do you want me to do that?
Yeah, well, I'll, so at Lee Hun, what is the point of PFEW? Seems to be a very expensive body that is not really required. Why do we not have just the individual branches and a small committee from them? That way we could not, we would not need a pointless hotel that none of you stay in and save a lot of money. Well, I think what you're saying is, why don't you just have some kind of a national committee made from the local joint branch boards to represent PFEW at a national level? I think that's what your question is asking. And if it is, well, that's essentially what the review is giving us. Because of the way that the structure of the organisation is changing, all of the national representatives are going to be elected from the Interim National Council, which is made up of the branch board chairs and secretaries of all of the branch boards, the 43 joint branch boards. And so the board, if you like, or committee, whatever you want to call it, is going to be made from the members of local boards. And that is what's going to provide that national level of conversation and influence. Does that make sense, Lee?
And I think on that as well, while Lee's coming back, I'd say that obviously the PFEW is the whole organisation, not just Leatherhead, that is the whole federation. We're all PFEW, including local branch boards. And of course, what's based here in Leatherhead is not just the officers like myself and Steve, but it's also our professional staff, people who work in research, who deal with things like pension and paying conditions matters for us. And of course, the individual branch boards lean heavily on them for assistance. The communications department, and also the way we're changing the structures of the organisation means that things like finance will be run far more centrally, more cost effectively in the future. But of course, that is where the staff, the majority of the staff within the federation are, which is here at the moment. So it's not just officers, there is a large number of staff here, nearly 100 staff who work at Leatherhead.
Lee, I will just come back on some of your additional comments there. Without have faith in the first place, I would accept that what we've got to do is we've got to rebuild trust between the national organisation and the local boards. I think we've come an awfully long way in the last couple of years, and certainly the way that the Interim National Council now has influence, direct influence, not just through regional reps, but direct influence in terms of the direction of the organisation has been absolutely key, and I think it's working much better than we ever used to have. And well, whilst there might be some people out there that say that, you know, we still centrally don't have our act in order, we're a lot better than in fact, and more effective than we have been, certainly in my time as a Fed rep since 2001. What I would say is that we are still not particularly good at letting our members, and indeed some of our reps, know what we do, both at a local level and nationally. invariably locally you don't realise what the federation does for you until you have need of them, and to a certain extent that's reflected at a national level. Until you come and you start getting involved, you don't realise what goes on at a national level. All of those forums and groups that we sit on and we influence every single day in the same way as local reps influence local commanders and local chief constables, we do it at a national level. Now, utopia might be that we don't have a need for any kind of central locus, but I just don't think that practically that could work. You need somebody who properly represents the organisation, who can have the conversation with the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister or the Shadow Home Secretary or the pay review body. You can't do it as a collective of 100 people every time. And we just need to make sure that we've got the structures in place to provide that level of trust that has been missing and has been eroded, definitely. Right, I just need to catch up to see.
I'll do the Daverton one while you're having a read. Daverton, thank you for your question. Fed numbers dropping, government appear fixated with our money, a lot of which goes on legal costs. Do we fear that moving forward outgoings are going to outstrip our income, undermine the Federation? I mean, again, a really good question. There is a plan. We do recognise the fact that some of our recent cases, such as Hillsborough, have cost us a lot of money. We need to look at our structures, which we're doing. We need to look about how the money flows within the organisation, and we're doing that as well. We need to listen to the professional help and make sure that we're getting cost-effective use out of every bit of members' money. And I think that is the key. So yes, there is an issue for us to keep an eye on it. But I think once the new structures are in place, it'll put us in a far better place moving forward for that. And I got you a bit about fun, so yeah, I understand a bit, but we need to keep an eye on it, but we're not in dire straits yet, so we can keep functioning. And it's about service delivery for the members. We need to keep as much of that gold standard as we possibly can, because that's what the members need.
And just coming back to a couple of comments from Lee, needs a complete clear out. No, I don't think so. Better representation and new reps coming on all the time and perhaps considering coming through the organisation. Absolutely, I agree with that 110%. A bit more members having a say, one member, one vote. Absolutely, and indeed part of the reform programme and indeed one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why we needed to make sure that we had the national member database built is to give the members that, exactly that, one member, one vote, so that, for example, the next time that the national chair is elected, it will be by the members, one member, one vote. And that will give a mandate for whoever is chair and elected on that to be able to represent the members and to have that mandate. And that's different from the way the other national board members and council members are being elected. Locally, the National Council members will be elected one member, one vote by their local forces. And then the council will elect the board, but the chair will be elected by the members. And so I would definitely agree with that.
I think there was one a minute ago about from Rob Board asking about influence on pay deals since 2010 and the lack of pay increases for officers. I think our submissions to the pay review body, which is what we have now instead of the old police negotiating board, have been very clear about what officers have lost over the last since 2010, since the coalition government came in, and we've laid that out for the pay review body to see. And of course, what we're saying as well is not only have officers taken that loss, but the danger is that good officers will leave and we won't get the right people in the job to do policing in the future unless you pay officers a decent wage, decent to reflect the risks that they take on a day-to-day basis, the breadth of work that they're expected to do now, all the different things within policing which they're expected to do, right equipment, but it's most important, it's about the right people given the right money. So I think we do, we've got a good, consistent message of that, but we've got a government, first coalition and now a Conservative government, who are very driven with reducing the scope of the public sector, and that includes pay. And it's been a battle for us along with every other public sector within the field, but it is something we've got to keep going with.
Andy, I don't know whether you mentioned it because I was busy looking at some other stuff, but of course we've got the publication we're expecting this week of the report from the police pay review body, probably going to be on Wednesday. And we'll see what they made of our submission, our evidence submission in relation to this year's pay deal. And I think we're going to have to think long and hard, depending on what they say, as to what our next steps are going to be to make sure that we can influence that. Part of the influencing has to be not so much behind the scenes, but less direct, has to be indirect in terms of getting the public on side, in terms of getting the public to understand the pressures that the police service are under, getting their support. The Believing Blue campaign is part of that, so that when it comes to going to government and saying, you know, we really do need to think long and hard about how we can properly remunerate our officers, we have political backbench support, because their constituents, their members of the public, the people who are going to be voting for them to maintain being an MP, are saying they are concerned about the ability of their local police service, and that's one of the things that we've got to do, and we are doing through the Believing Blue campaign, I believe. Just looking down the parks again, ranked boards, regions, local boards, committees all seem very divisive. There's clear conflict between different fractions across the country. In your positions, how are you addressing it? That's clear, strong and fair leadership needed. I couldn't agree with you more. It's fair to say that it's not very easy sometimes. One of the strengths of us as an organisation, I think, is because we are a very broad church. We have a lot of differing views, and I think, without wishing to sound like a broken record, the changes in the structures to the organisation are going to mean that people have a voice, that they can have different views and opinions, but then a decision has to be made in a democratic way as to what the best way forward is. And then as an organisation, we've got to say, okay, that democratic decision has been made, and we're now going to get behind it and have cabinet responsibility over those messages. Of course, one of the things we've got to bear in mind is that policing in one part of the country, whilst there's a lot of commonality, there are different pressures, there are different issues. Whilst you're dealing with 43 different police forces, there's a lot of inconsistency with the way that police officers are treated. And so we need to bear in mind that people will have those different views. And sometimes it's not a one answer fits all. And so you've always got to be able to give autonomy to local joint branch boards up to a point. And it's not easy. But I think when you're talking about different factions across the country, a lot of it goes back to what I said earlier around rebuilding trust. You know, we say we're an apolitical organisation, and we are, but we're also a political organisation because we are elected representatives. You can't get away from that. And so we have to be careful. But of course, bottom line is both Andy and I, you know, we're police officers, we're not politicians. And certainly I see my role as the chair of bringing those voices together, having the conversation, maybe having the disagreements, but then coming up with a consensus and a common path. And certainly in terms of the journey that we've been on around the review, I've learnt a lot from that process. I think the organisation has learnt a lot from that process. And sometimes it's been really difficult. But as we've seen, we are a reforming, changing organisation. We are still here. We still have a very strong voice, both in the media and with government. And I do see things improving. But the job isn't finished yet, definitely.
I've got the COPS Against, which is once in possession of 100% of the funds, how do you intend on reimbursing branch board costs? And will there be a conflict if a particular branch board is in disagreement with the National Committee? How we're going to do it is around budgeting. So we're bringing in, we've already got professional expertise within the finance department, but we're bringing in more professional expertise. They will help us create a budgeting system. And of course, that will help the boards budget their money to make sure everyone gets what they need to run their own local federations. And the primary aim of that is that it's looking after the members. So if there's something that a board wants to do and it's for the benefit of the members, then of course no one's going to have anything to say about that, as long as we can all afford it. Affordability does come in. If there's a disagreement, we have a process by which disagreements are dealt with. Again, professional people within the finance world deal with these things all the time, where budgets tend to go backwards and forwards before they're finally agreed. And of course, it wouldn't just be a disagreement with a particular board in the National. The National Council of all the boards get to sit on the National Council. So I'm sure there'd be discussions, as Steve said a little while ago, about how do we deal with issues moving forward. The National Council have a role to this in play, because it's not just about the people who happen to sit on the national board in the future, it's also the people on the council having a view, coming to an agreement, and then everyone does that. So I'm sure, yes, there will be disagreements, but there'll be a process in place to how we deal with them moving forward.
I'm going to take Lee's next. It's two comments in one hit, I think, if I can. I just see more Fed reps leaving than joining. We have a borough in the Met which has no reps. Other reps talk to me and are clearly dissatisfied and they're leaving or left. There still seems to be a rank structure within the Fed. I'll take the second point first. Certainly in terms of, when I became a Fed rep, I was told it's a rankless organisation. And then I went to my first meeting, and there we have the Constables branch board, the Sergeants branch board, the inspectors. Well, that sounds quite rankist to me. And what the review has recognised is that there needs to be adequate representation for everybody in the organisation, but it shouldn't be based purely on rank and equal numbers. Bearing in mind that that idea came from the way that the Police Federation was set up by government back in 1919. So we're actually getting rid of that sort of rank structure side of things. In terms of Fed reps leaving and joining, well, again, part of the review is we said we had to be a smaller, more efficient organisation. We didn't need as many reps as we used to have, but we needed to be able to use those reps that we have in a more efficient way. If reps are just leaving because they're fed up, particularly in the Met, then I'd like to know why. If it's just because they don't have to leave, but because they've had enough. Because we need good quality local reps, and we need to be able to attract people to become reps in order to represent the organisation. I think in terms of having reps who are younger in service, who haven't been, in the organisation for years and years, perhaps have a system where people come in to be reps, they serve a bit of time, they get some experience around all sorts of different work areas that they wouldn't necessarily be exposed to as an officer, and then to perhaps move on and do something else. I mean, I was a Fed rep as a sergeant when I first became a Fed rep. Then when I was promoted to inspector, I resigned, had to leave the board, and I came back as an inspector. But going back to your point, as chair of the organisation, this can be any rank. It just so happens that I'm an inspector, but that doesn't carry any weight, if you like. Just because I'm an inspector doesn't mean I sit there and give orders or anything like that. Certainly not. That's not my role, and that shouldn't be the role. So I don't feel as though rank has that influence. And once the central committees, and indeed at local level, branch board level, the separate rank branch boards become a single board.
Shall I take the next one?
Then that
it's your comment, actually. I didn't know
should go even further. I'm just looking at it now. In reference to Steve's comment that we'll just police officers, not police, scout national officers and replace the executives.
I think the organisation has decided,
and
probably unions and staff associations.
Do you want to stab at this first? And
officers fulfil the roles and are advised by professionals. So it's actually the other way round from your comment, that we are advised rather than us advising executives. And I think the problem you have with having executives as opposed to elected officers is that degree of accountability. It doesn't always work the best, but hopefully with the things we're doing around accreditation of courses, which is already in place, and training Fed reps to actually undertake roles, what you get is someone who is aware of all the aspects of policing, because they've done it, and can still represent the views of officers in a professional way. and then we have advisors who help us with that rather than the other way around. I mean, it's an interesting thing, and of course that may change in the future as we work forward, but for the time being, that's where we've kind of landed with what the review will deliver for us.
Just in relation to that as well, I just wanted to add that actually I still think that there has to be a balance, because you need to have people at the right executive level who have the experience to do the job that's been asked of them, you know, head of communications, strategic advisors, research. But I do think it is very powerful, still being a serving officer, for example, to be able to have that direct conversation, whether it be with the Home Secretary or with the Prime Minister or other chief constables. Having that commonality of still being a police officer is very powerful, being able to speak from your own experience. And, you know, we're strong supporters, aren't we, in the police service, of saying, you know, the experiential learning cycle. Unless you've walked the beat and been out there on a Friday or Saturday night in trouble, thinking I'm going to get my head kicked in, is really powerful. And that's what gives me the passion to do what I'm doing, because I believe very firmly in the job that you all do out there, and that I used to do as a frontline cop. And I can bring some of those stories to life. And I think it's quite important that if you're representing police officers, you need to know what that is like. And so I think it's still a powerful argument to say there needs to be an element of proper representation
emails,
from
so
serving
you've got
officers.
access from poll-fed accounts. A really good question, which I'd love to do, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. It's taken us an absolute age to get forces to agree for us to access their PNN email bits, and to do it in reverse is a good idea, and it makes perfect sense, but that's going to take us a while. We're also going to have to bed down the database to show that we're able to manage it properly, because there's a lot of issues around security on the new PNN system. So it's a great idea. I'll save it away, but I don't think it's going to happen soon on that one.
We've got a question that's come in via Twitter, not on Blab. Trying to read this right. What does that say? Yorkie Boy Paul, I think it is, asking, is Fed for or against Taser? Easiest question of the night so far. Certainly from a national perspective, whilst there are local variations, from a national perspective, our position is that we have called for a greater rollout of Taser. We've been more specific in relation to that, and we've said that every frontline uniformed police officer who volunteers to carry Taser should be trained and equipped with Taser. We do believe that it's still important for individual officers to be volunteers to carry it, and for them to make their own judgment as to whether or not they want to carry it. But certainly we've seen some forces that have been very proactive around a greater rollout of Taser, Devon and Cornwall in particular. The Chief Constable there has said that he wants all of his officers who want Taser to be equipped with it. And they've engaged with a very effective consultation process with local communities down there, so that when more officers are equipped with Taser, that the local communities are absolutely on side. I personally think that the argument in relation to Taser and the public has been won. You will always get those examples where Taser has been used and there's been issues with it. And people will suddenly jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, it's terrible, we shouldn't have it. But I think the vast majority of members of the public, and what did it for me, I think, was the incident that we had at Leytonstone with that terrorist attack on an individual cutting someone's throat. And it was police officers with Taser that were filmed and very clearly brought that to a successful conclusion. And I think a lot of members of the public are thinking whether we all carry it anyway. The big issue, the big problem really with Taser is that it looks too much like a gun, and so people think that that it is some sort of a firearm. And interestingly, I've had constructive conversations with Taser. I mean, they are the only suppliers at the moment. around them considering producing a bit of kit that just does the same thing but doesn't look like a firearm. And indeed, they're up for doing that, but they're not going to do it unless there's some kind of commercial return for them, obviously, because they're going to have to invest money into it. And I think one of the things that is still open for debate, the Devon and Cornwall example that I was talking about just then, they're having to find £1.8 million of extra money in order to equip their officers. I think there's a very strong argument for saying, and indeed I have said to the Home Secretary and did say to the Home Secretary at conference, that there is money available and that it should be funded centrally, so that Chief Constables and PCCs, when they're making difficult funding decisions, don't have to put officer safety against spend. If it works and it keeps officers safe and it keeps members of the public safe, the issue of money shouldn't be the deciding factor. And I think there's a strong argument, and we are continuing to present that argument to government, saying that that they should provide the resources. And I hope that Chief Constables, such as the Chief of Devon and Cornwall, they will follow suit and say, no, this is something that is so valuable, that is so effective, that we need to go to the Home Secretary, whoever that is going to be.
And the one from Jersey 04, which is via Twitter, is will Brexit affect policing? I think we both probably got a view on that, but yes, it will. I think it will affect policing in a lot of different ways. One, how we interact with our European partners in policing. There are fixed agreements at the moment, and we've got to look at them, and the chief officers, Chiefs Council have already made mention about the fact that we need to make sure that all the security arrangements in place, some of which are delivered through EU agreements, are still captured so that we can maintain those contacts. Policing needs to be cross-border, international now, not just within Europe, but globally. So we need to make sure we don't lose anything out of that when we exit the EU. And also around a whole raft of things which have come from the European Union, a lot of which are enshrined in police regulations now around pay, such as the working time directives, a lot of which started off as EU legislation. Those kind of things are important to police officers, and we've got to preserve them. So I think those bits, it's going to be very fluid time over the next couple of years, but we've got to look about the benefits that the EU brought and not lose them for police officers' paying conditions. And of course, what we've already seen since the result of the Brexit vote is that it causes uncertainty, and if it's going to affect public finances, that can have an effect on the public purse. So we need to see what happens over the next couple of years. And uncertainty isn't good when you're trying to plan out a major piece of reform to the police service, which is what the chiefs, what the Home Office are trying to do at the moment. So it will cause uncertainty. It is going to have an effect on policing in the future, but I don't think many people know exactly what that looks like at the moment.
So we've got a couple of conference-related questions from Dabatom or Davatom. Instead of letting the Home Secretary speak or address the conference after the chair berate PFEW officers, then leave feeling rather chuffed, why not put the Home Sec on first, then the chair, basically so that we can counter some of the things that the Home Secretary might say. And at the same time, from Lee, why are we still even entertaining the Home Secretary? I don't know whether we actually entertain her. Sing her a song or something, but we've got to take personalities out of this. This is about the Office of State, the Home Secretary. It just so happens that the Home Secretary has been the longest serving Home Secretary, and so I guess we've got quite used to it being Theresa May. But whatever we think about the individual, or whatever you might think about the individual, is the Secretary of State that we've got to do business with. We've got to be able to represent our members, in my view, with the government at the very highest level, and we do that by speaking to the Home Secretary, whoever that may be. Not speaking to the Home Secretary, I don't believe, would improve a lot of police officers at all. It's my view. In relation to the idea of letting the Home Secretary speak first, funny enough, you're not the only person to have raised that. personally, I'm quite relaxed about it. I'm not quite sure why it's always been the chair goes first and then the Home Secretary, whoever that may be. And it's certainly something that I'd be happy to look at. And I think that it could work either way. I'm quite relaxed about it. And indeed, because our conference is changing, we're pulling together a working group from local joint branch boards and some national officers to look at the way that we do conference. And certainly one of the things that we're going to be looking at is how do we manage the home set side of things. Certainly since I've joined, I think we've opened it up and made things a lot better around the Home Secretary. We have an opportunity for all reps to ask a significant number of questions of the Home Secretary. And indeed this year we had a live link via Skype. It was a member, not a rep, a member from Devon and Cornwall asking the Home Secretary direct live in the hall a question in relation to Taser as it happened. So it's important for us to have that conversation with the Home Secretary, whoever it is, and for our members to have that voice and our reps to have that voice so they can represent how officers are feeling. To just not have a conversation with the Home Secretary I don't think
question for
would help.
I think what
so
it's saying is, was the accountant not ousted at the last IMB? I hope not, because we've got accountants in the building and I hope they're still here working. And I think that question is around how we're going to deal with money in the future. And yes, that will change. Our treasurer's positions at the moment, who are supported by professionals, will adapt as we go forward. And there's been some different views around the country about what the best method of doing that in the future, financial governance. But what we've decided to do is to bring professional assistants in that tell us how best to manage money on a national basis. And they're going to give us the steers, they're going to tell us the best way forward. And then we'll have conversations with the board and the council about whether we agree with that and whether we think that's the right way for the organisation. So yes, the treasurer's role will change in the future. Whether they still exist or not is yet to be decided. But it's based on taking professional advice and listening to that and saying this is the best way to manage the money for the members moving forward. I've lost track now.
So I was going to Jez 1104. Do the Federation publish allowances claimed by representatives? If not, would you consider? I mean, things disappeared again. Transparent way of letting the members know how their money is being spent. I'm a chair, so I don't do detail. However, my understanding is that the accounts that we publish every year, and indeed they're called in by the Home Secretary and the Chief Constable, every Chief Constable, should have that level of detail.
I think what we're doing, as you say, is basically saying what you said around the transparency, letting people know what's been spent on what. As far as individuals' accounts being published, you do, personally I haven't got a problem with it, but you do have to be careful around that because it has to be put in context. For instance, last week, if you looked at I have a credit card which the Federation gave me. Last week I spent a fair bit on flowers, which was based on sending some staff who've been very ill, a bunch of flowers, nothing to do with me. It was done, but it appears on my credit card bill. So unless that's put in some kind of context, people would say, well, what were you doing buying flowers or whatever, paying for a member of staff on my card to travel somewhere for a meeting. So things do appear on certain representatives' bills, which you have to put in context. So again, I haven't got a problem with people seeing what is spent. It just must be sort of contextualised. I think that's what we're, as Steve said, that's what we're going to do moving forward.
Just going on to another one from Lee about your idea of borough policing and rank and rising up to SLT level, you'd lose touch with the troops. I think we all know where you're coming from there. And could it be true of PFEW? Well, I made the point at the start of the blab that I came straight from a 24/7 response inspector role to a national rep. I accept that after some time, and I've been here for 4 years, I think it is now, that things become diluted. But what I would say is that, as far as I'm aware, I've been the first Federation chair who still goes out on patrol, wears uniform, and indeed, I don't do it as often as I want to. I accept that the last time I was out on patrol was the end of November last year, which seems like quite a long time ago, which was in Leicester. I've done patrol in Bradford, in West Yorkshire, in Avon Somerset in my home force, in Greater Manchester, and certainly I think it's important for me and for Fed reps to be able to still do that. I also do take your point that in terms of us maintaining relevance with our members, that's what we've really got to do. We've got to make sure that actually we do know what our members are feeling and facing. And this event tonight, for example, is a way to do that. Accepting that at the end of a long shift, perhaps the last thing you want to do is to come onto Blab and say, you know, I've had a really bad shift and this has happened and that's happened. But I'm certainly hoping that by being able to engage much better with our members, and this isn't just about PFEW saying things to the members, it's about us listening back. It's about us hearing from the members and being able to represent that in an effective way. But one of the things around having, one of the things I've been thinking about, actually, I'm going to get people giving me funny looks in a minute, is saying to have a system of having members saying, right, come to Leatherhead, come for a week, get the permission of your Chief Constable, come and be that link, whether it be working alongside me or Andy as a GenSec or one of the other national roles here, so that we can hear from those officers direct. And also they can see what we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I'm just kind of flicking through. There's a few coming in now. If asked by party around FOI requests, obviously the government of Home Secretary said the Federation is going to be subject to the FOI. We're still working through exactly what that looks like. And the question is around anticipating that, predicting the content nature of the request. What do you plan to do around policy around it? I think what we do is, one, look at what it exactly means for the organisation, and then we protect the core business, and that is around our legal provision. So obviously a lot of legal work we do is highly sensitive. It's not information we'd like to release into the public domain through FOI. So we look at legal privilege and how we manage that process, and it's going to take an investment by us to manage that, because obviously some of the other questions you get about you know, how many miles have you travelled this week or whatever, if they're asking me a question, that's not an issue, and there's no danger to the organisation around anything coming out that's subject to legal privilege on that. That's fine, but it's how you manage that process, how many requests you get coming in, and how you deal with it. And obviously our ability to function, we're a relatively small organisation, so it's our ability to function while we go through that. And obviously we have to look at the impact on, because we're not a public body. No other body like ours is subject to the FOI at the moment, and the government have treated us uniquely with this. So we've got to look about the impact on that and what we do. But largely it's around protecting the legal provision of our business.
Going back to your other point, Lee, around focus groups at Leatherhead, and I see that you live near Leatherhead. I was contacted by a sergeant from Sutton several weeks ago who were raising a number of questions. Because Sutton isn't very far from Leatherhead, I said, well, let's have a conversation. I'll come to you. As it turns out, he came to Leatherhead along with a number of other sergeant colleagues that he brought with him. We sat and we had a conversation for an hour and a half about all sorts of bits and pieces. I'm always more than happy to do that. I actually prefer going out to the police station, to be honest, because I don't get out of it very often. But more than happy to have those conversations. And Lee, if you live just down the road at Leatherhead, in all seriousness, email me at chairman@polford.org and arrange to come in and have a bit of a conversation, or indeed I'll come to wherever you're working and have that conversation there, and perhaps speak to some of your colleagues as well. I'm more than willing to do that, and that's an honest, open offer to you. You know, contact me and let's do that. We are going to, sorry, I'm just going to say we've got 2 minutes.
I was just saying there's something coming for the cops against our pensions issue, which is really good. It's going to take me a little while. I think we're going to do a separate one of these just on pensions matters. And can I say I'll take that away and we'll bring that back as one of the set questions, which I'll start off with, because that's too much detail. Obviously, Constable Chaos, I think they're going to help us out with that one.
Yeah, and Cops Against. Have I blocked you? I'll unblock you definitely. I'm not sure who's blocked, but that's fine. Thanks for that. Okay, I think our time is pretty much up. I hope that the people who've joined us have found it useful. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all the questions. I think we managed to cover quite a lot of them. More than happy to do this again if people find it useful, and if we can get more people involved and engaged, then I think that would be really good as well. And certainly to any of the serving officers that have taken part in this, I am, in all honesty, more than happy to come and visit you at your stations, to speak to you and your shifts, the teams,
thank you very much,
work
everyone,
with, and have similar conversations that we've had tonight. So, Andy, do you want to say goodbye? And thank you to everybody, and I hope this is the start of many more engagements like this. So many thanks, and stay safe. Cheers.